They said she was a ghost of the past, not because she was old, not because she wandered the fields at dusk in silence, but because she never left, never changed, never gave up on a promise everyone else had already buried. Every Sunday evening, she walked out to the field behind the red farmhouse with a bundle of pink roses and a heart that had learned how to wait without hope. Her name was Eleanor May, and once a long time ago, she had loved a man in uniform, Sheriff Luke Callahan. He promised her a house, a porch swing, a quiet life. Then he vanished. No goodbye, no letter. Just a storm one night and a gunfight nobody would explain. They said he was dead. Some whispered he ran. But Eleanor never believed either story. She just kept waiting, because love doesn't always need proof. Sometimes it just needs time. And 17 years later, as the sun set over the same field where she once said yes, the man she never stopped loving finally came back. But he wasn't alone, and he wasn't just carrying guilt. He was carrying flowers. The letter wasn't hidden well. It was tucked inside the old Bible that Eleanor kept on the shelf. Not because she read it often, but because it had been his, Sheriff Luke Callahan's. She dusted it once a week, flipped it open sometimes when the ache was too loud in her chest. But she never thought to check the back cover. Not until the binding cracked on a warm June morning and a piece of folded paper slipped out like it had been waiting all these years just for her fingers. She stared at it for a long moment. Cream-colored, edges yellowed, ink faded. It wasn't addressed to anyone. Just a single word at the top. May. Her heart dropped like a stone in a still lake. She didn't read it at first. She couldn't. She made tea with shaking hands, set the cup down twice because she forgot she'd already poured it. Then she sat in the same chair by the window, the one that faced the pasture and the distant gravel road, and unfolded the paper like she was unwrapping a wound. The handwriting was unmistakable, firm, upright. Luke's. But it wasn't a love letter. It was a confession. May, if you're reading this, then you found what I didn't mean to leave behind. I didn't die. I ran, not from you. God knows, never from you, but from a man who came to our town with money and blood on his boots. I couldn't arrest him, couldn't touch him. He bought the mayor, bought the judge. So he made me choose. Stay and get you hurt, or leave and stay gone. I chose wrong. Every day since, I've thought about coming back. But every time I got close, someone from that man's circle made sure I remembered what they could still do to you. And I couldn't risk it. I just hope you lived. I hope you loved again. I hope the house we dreamed of became real, even if it wasn't with me. Luke. She read it once, then again, then a third time. Each word carving opened a piece of the past she thought had long gone cold. He hadn't left her. He had saved her. At least he thought he had. But no one had come after her. No one had threatened the farm. She hadn't been hunted, only haunted. She looked out the window. Same porch, same field, same sky. He had vanished into shadows while she had stayed visible in the light. For him. That evening, she walked to the back field with the letter in her pocket and the roses in her hand. She didn't place them on a grave. She placed them on the fence post where he first kissed her, 17 years ago, after asking her if she believed in forever. She did then. She still did. But now that she knew the truth, what was she supposed to do with it? The next morning, something changed. It started with hoofbeats, not from town, not from the trail, from the east side where nothing came except storms and strays. She stepped onto the porch and saw the dust cloud long before the shape. A rider, tall in the saddle, hat pulled low, moving slow, like someone who'd rehearsed this return every night in his dreams and still didn't believe he deserved to live it. Eleanor's heart stopped because she knew that walk, that lean, that impossible stillness in the chaos of wind and heat. It was Luke, older, thinner, but him. He stopped 10 paces from the house, didn't dismount, didn't wave, just tipped his hat, like they hadn't lost 17 years, but just 17 hours. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't run to him. Instead, she stepped forward, slowly, carefully, and said, You forgot your Bible. He smiled barely. That Bible saved me more than once. You never sent that letter. No, he said. I wrote it 100 times. I just never had the guts to deliver it. Well, she said, crossing her arms. I delivered it to myself yesterday, without warning. I figured that out when I saw the roses. She raised a brow. You been watching me? For years. A silence hung in the heat. He dismounted finally, stepped forward. I didn't think you'd still be here. I didn't think you'd still be alive. Another pause, then. Why now? Luke looked past her toward the house. He's gone. The man who kept me running. Shot in Kansas last winter. I saw his name in a bounty notice. For the first time in 17 years, I had no one chasing me. She didn't speak. He stepped closer. May, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a place. But I had to come back and see if you were still you. She nodded. I am. Are you alone? She tilted her head. You're here, aren't you? He swallowed hard. I brought something. She blinked. What? He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a bundle of pink roses, fresh, still cold with morning dew. Figured after 17 years, he said softly. I should bring flowers this time. She took them, not with joy, not with tears, but with a quiet grace born of years that taught her how to survive silence. She smelled the roses, then looked up, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades, she smiled. Eleanor had only seen 3 men walk like that in her life. One was her father, coming back from war with a limp and a silence no prayer could fix. One was a man she never named, the one who broke her heart when she was too young to know what breaking meant. And the third was Luke Callahan. That gait, calm but ready, proud but careful, was burned into her memory like the smell of ash after a barn fire. It was the walk of a man who'd buried too much, carried too far, and still chose to return. Even when he didn't think he had the right. Luke sat on the porch swing with one hand wrapped around the armrest, the other holding a cup of coffee she'd poured in the old tin mug with the chip near the rim. She hadn't asked him to sit. He hadn't waited to be invited. And somehow it felt like they'd done this exact thing 1,000 times before. Except they hadn't. 17 years had passed. Entire lifetimes. Wars, birthdays, winters without a fire warm enough. But the porch was the same. The house still stood. And so did the silence. Do you remember that summer before I left? He asked, not looking at her. I remember everything, she answered. Even the part I tried to forget. He nodded. We talked about building a fence around the pasture. You bought the wood. I painted the boards. You never nailed a single one in. He smiled faintly. Didn't want to trap anything. You trapped me just fine, she said softly. Inside, the clock ticked loud enough to feel like judgment. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the first dry scent of cut hay from the fields. He watched it. That breeze. That space between them. There were days I thought about writing, he said. Why didn't you? Because I figured the silence might be safer than the truth. You thought silence would protect me. He nodded. And in that silence, she said, you left me to bury you alive. He flinched at that. Not visibly, but she saw it. The way his fingers tightened around the mug. The way his jaw moved, just once. I didn't know, he said, that no one came after you. That you were left alone. I thought I was protecting you. She stepped onto the porch. Leaning against the post, arms folded, she looked at him like someone trying to find the shape of an old melody in a new song. You did protect me, she said, from everything except the not knowing. They didn't speak for a while after that. The wind took over. Birds called in the far trees. Somewhere a gate creaked loose on a hinge. And still they sat like the whole world had narrowed to the distance between a wooden porch and 2 broken hearts. He sipped the coffee. She watched the road, and the past hung between them like smoke. Later that day, she brought out an old box from the back of the pantry, set it on the porch table without a word. He opened it. Inside, a tin star, a dried rose, a photograph of them on the 4th of July, the year before he disappeared. You kept all this? He asked, stunned. I kept everything, she said, because throwing it away would have felt like admitting you never existed. He picked up the star, turned it in his hands. You were a good sheriff, she said. He looked up. I wasn't good enough. You were young. He nodded. That was the excuse. The truth was, I was scared. The afternoon stretched long. They walked the field together once, slowly. No words, just the crunch of dry grass under their boots and the feeling of 1,000 untold stories in the air. He stopped near the old fence line, the one they'd never finished. I thought I'd come back and it'd all be gone, he said. She looked at the house, the barn, the line of trees beyond the ridge. It almost was. Twice. What stopped you from leaving? She looked at him. You. That evening she made dinner. He offered to help. She let him peel the potatoes and he did it clumsily, cutting them too thick. You never did learn this part, she teased, too busy trying to learn how to leave. They sat at the table as the sun dipped low. Neither of them said it, but they both knew this meal mattered, because meals were things you shared with people who were staying, not with people passing through. Afterward, he helped her wash the dishes. The way he wiped the plates, she could see it in his hands. This wasn't just a visit. It was a man trying to remember how to belong. As darkness fell, he stepped back onto the porch and sat on the swing again. She followed, blanket in hand, sat beside him, close but not quite touching. He stared up at the stars. I watched over you, he said quietly. She turned to him. What do you mean? I came through town twice a year, bought supplies, asked around, never said my name. You were here? I never left completely. I just stayed outside the firelight. She swallowed hard. That's not watching, Luke. That's haunting. He nodded. Maybe, but I couldn't not look. Not once. The swing creaked again. She rested her head back against the beam. Why now, she asked. Because you never gave up on me, he said, and I finally realized that's what I've been trying to earn. And I'm not there yet. She looked at him. No, she agreed, but you're not running anymore either. He met her gaze. For the first time in years, they saw each other fully. Not as they had been, but as they were. Older, bruised, but still standing. That night she left the door unlocked. Didn't say anything about it. Didn't have to. He slept on the porch again, same swing, same blanket. But this time he dreamed of a house that hadn't moved on, and of a woman who'd never let go. Luke had never been good at saying things straight. Even when he wore a badge and carried a gun, he spoke in fragments, half-truths, half-sentences, and full silences. But now, sitting in the same kitchen, where she used to cook for two and then for one, he knew it was time to say it all. It started over coffee, again. But this time, he didn't reach for the mug. He folded his hands and looked down at the worn wooden table like it might collapse under what he was about to say. Eleanor sat across from him, still, watching, waiting. He breathed in, then started. The man who came to Chariot back then, his name was Donovan Crane. Her breath caught. You never told me a name. I didn't dare, he said. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a shadow. Owned railroads, banks, half the lawmen in the county. He looked at her, and he wanted me out of the way. Why? She asked. Luke's voice dropped. Because I wouldn't let him hang a boy for a crime he didn't commit. He wanted to set an example. I got in the way, made enemies. Who was the boy? His name was Jesse Harlan, 15, had nothing but a slingshot and a smile. Did you save him? Luke nodded once. Got him out of town on a freight train, right before Crane's men torched the blacksmith shop looking for him. Eleanor's hands tightened around her mug. I remember that fire. We thought it was an accident. I know. Luke stood, paced once, stopped at the window. He sent a man to your door that same night, he said. Not to hurt you, just to show me he could. Eleanor blinked. I never knew. You wouldn't. The man never knocked. Just stood by your barn. I saw him from the ridge. That's when I knew what he was capable of. She looked down. And so you left. I left, he said, his voice cracking. To save me. To lose you, he corrected. I thought they'd stop watching you if I disappeared. That they'd think you were just a girl I left behind. And did they? He hesitated. Yes. He turned around fully now, leaning on the counter like it was the only thing holding him up. But I didn't. I stayed close. I came back every 3 months, sometimes more. Why? To see if you were alive, to see if I was forgiven. You didn't ask. I didn't dare. Eleanor rose slowly, crossed to the small drawer beside the sink. She pulled out a tin box and opened it. Inside, 23 matchsticks, all burnt halfway down. She held it out. I lit one every time I thought I'd never see you again. Luke stared. She continued, and I only stopped because I didn't have any more to burn. He looked away. Because if he didn't, he'd break. And he couldn't afford to break. Not now. You were in danger, he said again, softer this time, even if you didn't see it. And you think I was safe, here alone on this land, with rumors of you running off and everyone calling me a fool? I never called you that, but you let them. Silence again, except this time, it hurt less, because the truth had weight, and weight had shape, and shape could finally be carried. Later that day, Eleanor took him to the tree line where the roses grew wild. I didn't plant these, she said. They started blooming 2 years after you left. Luke knelt beside them, ran his hand over the thorns. I used to leave clippings here, he said quietly, when I couldn't risk leaving a note. She blinked. That was you. I didn't think you'd know. I didn't, but I kept every one. They sat beneath the tree, the same one they carved their initials into before the war reached even the quiet parts of the world. The carving had faded, but it was still there. L plus E, 2 letters, still standing, like them. I passed through town more than once, he admitted, but I never had the courage to knock. She smiled just barely. That explains the man who bought 10 pounds of oats and paid in Canadian coins? He grinned. Didn't think you saw me. I always saw you. I just didn't believe it was real. The sun began to dip. The shadows grew long. Luke stood, walked to the fence line. You forgave me, he said, not as a question, but a statement. Eleanor didn't answer right away. Then she said, I didn't forgive you because you came back. He turned. I forgave you because you never stopped looking back. The 4th spring after he vanished, Eleanor planted sunflowers. Not because she liked them, because they were stubborn. They grew tall, even in the hardest soil. They refused to look down. They followed the sun like it was the only truth left in the sky. She watered them every morning, trimmed the dead leaves, tied the stems when they grew too heavy for their own weight. And when the blooms finally opened wide in July, she stared at them from the porch and whispered, at least something stayed. The years after Luke left didn't unravel. They calcified, slowly, quietly, one season at a time. She lost her mother first, fever in late winter, no one to fetch the doctor in time, no one to hold her hand in the final hour except Eleanor, who sat by the bedside reciting psalms she hadn't read in a decade. After the burial, the house grew quieter, colder. She filled it with chores instead of company. Then came the bank, threatening foreclosure, not for anything she did, but because the co-signed deed still had Luke's name. She fought it, alone. 3 hearings, 1 ride into the next county, 4 letters, no answer. Until finally the sheriff, Luke's replacement, signed the affidavit to release the lien. He didn't smile when she thanked him. He just said, he left more than a woman behind. After that, she stopped going to town unless she had to. People talked. Whispers floated behind her in church pews and feed lines like smoke with no fire. Still living out there alone? She's got too much pride. I heard he ran off with another woman up near Abilene. I heard he's dead. I heard she still sets a place for him at dinner. Some of it was true, some of it wasn't. But the stories didn't hurt as much as the silences, the invitations she didn't receive, the hands that stopped waving. One evening during a late summer thunderstorm, she found herself sitting in the barn, just sitting, the rain crashing around her like 100 hooves in the dark. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at the beam overhead, where they had once carved a promise. L plus C, home, always. And with the back of her boot, she kicked over the feed bucket, not out of rage, but because she needed something to move. She thought of marrying once. Jacob Fisher had kind eyes, the kind that waited at the edge of your silence, patient and unbothered. He brought her extra seed in spring and once left a copy of a poetry book on her porch with a note that simply said, "In case you're still reading." He asked her once, over stew and cornbread. She told him no, not because she didn't want kindness, but because her love was still buried under the ashes of a vanished man. He understood, eventually, but he never came back. The hardest part wasn't the silence. It was realizing that no one was coming to break it. Not the world, not the man, not even the version of herself that once believed love would be loud enough to bring someone home. And yet, she never left the house, never sold the land, never took off the red shawl he gave her on their last Christmas together. It hung by the door like a prayer, one she couldn't quite let go of. So when Luke came back, with lines in his face and dirt on his boots, and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen kindness in years, she didn't fall into his arms. She didn't rush to forgive. She made him sit with it, with the loss, with the version of her that had been rebuilt, not rescued. One evening after a long walk through the wheat field, they stopped near the creek. She knelt beside the water, picked up a smooth stone, and turned it in her hand. "You know what I lost waiting for you?" Luke crouched beside her, silent. "My name," she said. He blinked. "I used to be Eleanor Callahan in my mind, even before we were married, in the letters I never sent, in the way I signed flour sacks. But after 5 years, I stopped writing it." Luke reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't look at him either. "You took more than your body when you left," she said. "You took my future and left me in the past." He gripped her fingers. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know." They sat by the creek until the sun disappeared, until frogs began to hum in the grass, until forgiveness didn't feel like a demand, but like a seed, buried, unsure, but maybe ready. That night she laid a second pillow on the bed. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. But in the quiet, as they lay side by side with the distance of years still between them, she whispered one last thing. "I may have stopped being yours, but I never stopped being the woman you left." And he answered, "I never stopped being the man who wanted to come home." The roses had always bloomed in spite of everything. Floods, frost, even the year of the locusts, when every other plant in Sheriff had been chewed down to stalk and stem. Eleanor's roses stood like quiet survivors. She once thought it was a miracle. Now she knew better. It was Luke. She found the first grave behind the barn, marked only by a flat stone and a rusted horseshoe. It wasn't a person buried there. It was his badge, wrapped in oilcloth, tucked beneath 6 inches of dirt, left under the very ground where he once taught her how to shoot. He didn't tell her where it was, but that morning, after they walked the field together and he stopped short at the fence line, she saw it in his face. "I left something behind," he said. "You want to dig it up?" "No," he replied. "I want you to." She didn't ask why. She just went back to the house, brought a spade, and walked out alone. He waited on the porch. It took only 3 shovelfuls before the edge of the oilcloth peeked through the dirt. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. When she unwrapped the cloth and saw the tarnished badge, still shaped like a star, still heavy with silence, she sat down in the grass and stared at it for a long time. She remembered pinning it to his shirt the night he first became sheriff. How proud he looked. How afraid she was. How neither of them said what they really meant. She took the badge inside, polished it, set it on the mantel, and didn't say a word. That afternoon, they dug the second grave, not because someone had died, but because something had finally been laid to rest. 17 years of silence, 17 years of maybe. And this time, they brought flowers not as farewell, but as offering. They dug near the big oak at the edge of the field, where the sun hit longest in the day, where Eleanor used to sit and read letters she never sent. "What are we burying?" Luke asked as the hole took shape. 17 years, she said. He paused. "Are we mourning them?" She shook her head. "We're thanking them." They placed the roses into the earth, not as decoration, but as offering. Then she added the letter, the one she found in his Bible. He looked at her, alarmed. "You sure?" "Yes," she said. "It's done its work." They covered the grave in silence. No cross, no stone, just a line of wildflowers laid one by one. When they finished, they stood side by side, hands dirty, hearts heavier, but somehow freer. I spent so long resenting you, she said quietly. I spent just as long punishing myself. Did it help? No. Did you think you deserved it? He nodded. She touched his arm. So did I. That night, Eleanor sat on the porch and wrote a letter of her own. She didn't address it, didn't seal it. She just wrote, "To the woman I was, you were brave. Braver than you had to be. Braver than anyone knew. You made coffee when your hands shook. You planted things when your heart had no more room to bloom. You waited, and somehow that became your war. And you won. Love me." She folded it, placed it in the drawer where she used to keep the matchsticks. And then, with steady hands, she lit a single candle and let it burn to the end. The next morning, she walked Luke out to the north field, the one with the newest bloom. The roses had multiplied. Where once there were 5 bushes, now there were nearly 30. It happened all at once, she said. Like forgiveness, he murmured. She looked at him, or like love coming back from the dead. They walked the rows. He stopped at one particular bush, lower than the rest but thick with buds. He reached down, picked a single rose, and handed it to her. She took it, held it like something sacred. "What now?" he asked. She smiled. "We build the fence we never finished." He blinked. "You sure?" She turned to him. "I'm not building it to keep things in anymore." He nodded slowly. "Then what?" She stepped closer. "To mark what's ours." There were no grand declarations, no ceremony, no vows. Just 2 people who had survived a war neither of them had asked for, walking back into a house that had been waiting for both of them longer than it ever should have. And still, it stood, just like them. Eleanor moved the extra pillow from the cedar chest to the bed without a word. Luke repaired the back step, whistling softly between hammer strikes. She made stew. He fixed the roof. Not because they were trying to impress each other, but because it finally felt safe to belong again. In town, people began to notice. First, the feed store clerk, who saw 2 sets of muddy boots instead of 1. Then the preacher's wife, who passed by and saw a man and woman planting together in the yard, not speaking, not smiling, just digging side by side. Eventually, someone asked Eleanor, "Is he back for good?" And she answered without hesitation, "No." They raised a brow. She smiled. "He never really left." The house changed, subtly. He moved his saddle into the barn, hung his coat by the door, started shaving again. But he didn't take over. He didn't rearrange. He just fit, like he'd always been a part of the place. Only now the walls remembered him. They didn't sleep in each other's arms the first night, or the second. But by the third, their fingers found each other between the sheets, and neither pulled away. Eleanor began to hum again, while cooking, while brushing her hair, while folding the sheets. Luke never said anything about it, but he lingered longer in the kitchen, sat closer at the table, listened, because her music was the sound of something healing, and he needed to hear it more than she needed to know. One evening, near the end of harvest, he found her sitting on the porch with a pair of boots in her lap, tiny ones, dusty with age. She didn't explain. He didn't ask. But he knew. There had been a child once, or the dream of one, something lost along the way. He sat beside her, reached out, and gently took one boot into his palm. "I wasn't the only thing you lost," he said. She nodded, eyes glassy. "Number, but you were the only thing that ever came back." Fall passed quietly. The fence got finished. The roses were trimmed. The nights grew longer but not colder, because there was fire in the hearth, and breath beside her in the bed. Then one morning, winter close on the wind, Luke returned from town with a parcel, wrapped in butcher paper. He placed it on the table. Eleanor opened it. Inside, a new tin star, polished, untarnished, but not for wearing, engraved on the back, "For the man who came home." She stared at it, then looked up at him. "I didn't want this," he said. "Not really, but I needed to prove to myself that I could hold it again, without it breaking me." She reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. Then don't wear it. I won't. But hang it somewhere it can see us. He did, right above the door, where sunlight always caught it first, so that each morning when they crossed the threshold, they didn't just leave the house, they stepped into the life they almost lost. Not as sheriff and sweetheart, not as what the town remembered, but as who they became. Two people who returned, not to finish a story, but to begin a truer one. The house didn't creak like it used to. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt full, because waiting had ended, not with fanfare, but with footsteps on old floorboards, and forgiveness, softly offered over coffee and shared chores. That spring, before the roses bloomed again, Eleanor stood alone by the back fence one last time. The earth was damp beneath her boots, the sky still pale with morning. In her hands, she held the last letter she'd ever write to the man who didn't come home, the version of Luke she had mourned. She folded it twice, tied it with a red thread, and placed it under the roots of the newest rose bush. Not to bury the past. That spring, she planted roses again, but this time, not alone. And every Sunday morning, without fail, they walked out together, across the porch, past the fence, through the wildflowers, to stand before the two unmarked graves. They didn't cry, they didn't speak, they just held hands, for the 17 years they'd missed, and for every day after. One Sunday, as they stood by the twin graves, Eleanor slipped a small brass key into Luke's palm. He looked at her, puzzled. "It's for the chest under the stairs," she said. He nodded, understanding something deeper than locks and hinges. She smiled. "I used to keep it locked, just in case you came home, and I wasn't ready." "And now," he asked. "Now I want you to open it," she said, "because you're not just back. You belong here. They say some houses wait, not for paint or repairs, not for people to come and go, but for the ones who said they'd return, and meant it." Eleanor waited through 17 winters. Luke wandered through 17 ghosts, and when they finally came back to each other, there were no fireworks, just a porch, 2 mugs, and silence that no longer hurt. So let me ask you this. If someone left you to protect you, but never stopped looking back, could you ever forgive them? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because out there, across every quiet prairie and porch swing, there's always a house that's still waiting for love. Maybe this was one of them. Maybe it still is.